Chapter 1096. Ghost Parade. Seeing the announcement, everyone naturally clicked on it to check the details and see just how much of a party it would be for it to be called a carnival. But when they clicked on the page for this carnival, all they saw was a sinister ghost eerily staring back at them. The sound coming from their headphones was also the sound of evil winds. The less courageous players nearly had their hearts leap out of their throats. It was the scorching summer, but what arose from their hearts was a cold chill. Summer Carnival, Ghost Parade. Scarlet red words jumped out at them. At this moment, how could any of the players still felt like this was going to be a party? This event was clearly horror-themed. Looking at the details, the event itself was actually quite simple. It was catching ghosts. It was a different approach to last year's Christmas event of catching Christmas thieves, but the end result was the same. However, the event rules this time were more detailed and complicated. After all, it didn't coincide with a holiday. The Ghost Parade would last 1 week. The system would release a certain amount of ghosts every day. The players just needed to find and kill these ghosts. The ghosts themselves gave experience, gold, materials, equipment, and so on. As for the more high-end rewards, those would be given out the same as always, through the leaderboard. The leaderboard wasn't as simple as the number of ghosts killed because the ghosts released could grow. As these ghosts killed players, they would grow stronger. Stronger ghosts gave more points. The total points obtained was how the leaderboard calculated rankings. In the normal servers, there was a clear separation between level ranges. The Heavenly Domain was much simpler since everyone was level 75. Apart from the points leaderboard, there were other titles that gave out rewards. It was similar to Dungeon First Clears, only the first player to accomplish the feat was entitled to a reward. Experienced players understood enough of it with just a few glances. Glory events tended not to be too complicated. Their main feature was competition. Only rewards obtained through competing against others gave the most beautiful rewards. As for the rewards from killing ghosts, those could just be considered as participatory rewards. Normal players didn't have any hopes of making it to the top of the leaderboard. As per convention, Glory gave out final rewards depending on the player's position on the leaderboard. No matter what ranking you got, there would be an equivalent reward for you, so no matter what, everyone would be trying their hardest. Moving up a few ranks on the leaderboards meant better rewards. The Ghost Parade would start on 7/7, the second Monday of July. After the update, when the players logged on, the Glory world became similar to the event page, dark and murky. Dense black fog covered the sky. Not a single ray of light shone, yet there was no rain either. The entire world sunk into a fog of gray. There were no demons yet. The first wave would appear at 7 p.m. In the next few days, the other waves would also come out at 7 p.m. In this dark world, the players did their usual work as they waited for 7 p.m. to come. At 7 p.m., the sound of a bell toll suddenly rang throughout the entire Glory world. No matter what corner of the world you were in, even inside a dungeon, the bell toll resounded in everyone's ears. The bell tolled 7 times and the system released 5 huge scarlet words, Ghost Parade. Ah! In a main city somewhere, an ear-piercing scream echoed. A female blade master leapt back 4 times, but still failed to break away from the pursuit of a bunch of round wooden barrels. These wooden barrels had originally just been very ordinary decorations on the streets. The players walked past them every day. No one really paid any attention to them. At most, a bored player might step on it and jump around. But when the announcement of the Ghost Parade came out, these wooden barrels seemed to have come alive. That female blade master originally had her back to the wooden barrels on the lookout for these 100 ghosts to appear. How could she have known that there would be movement behind her? When she turned around, she saw these wooden barrels come to life, bending and twisting. A few of the lids on the buckets shook. It was as if these barrels were trying to swallow her. The female player cried out in fear and hastily retreated. By the time the surrounding players noticed the commotion going on here, they saw a bunch of wooden barrels chasing after that female player. The female player wasn't able to escape. Her blade master was instantly swallowed up by the barrels. Then, the barrels dispersed. A beauty had passed away. Only a belt was left. Equipment actually dropped. The players were shocked. This barrel ghost killed someone in an instant. These ghosts weren't as simple as people had thought. Without a clear grasp of the situation, the surrounding players didn't dare rashly advance. However, the wooden barrels took the initiative. The ghost chose another player on the streets and charged over. There were barrels rolling on the ground and barrels jumping into the air. One of the barrels had even leapt several meters into the air, crashing down like the fall of Mount Tai. "What's going on?" The targeted player cried out and wanted to escape too, but these barrels had surrounded him, trapping him in the center. Following afterwards, the barrels converged and the player died. The players on the street were struck dumb. They had been waiting for the ghosts to spawn, waiting to fight for every second, but then a bunch of dirty wooden barrels popped up and killed 2 people in just this short amount of time. "It looks pretty strong." "Ah," a player said to his friend next to him, but he didn't hear a reply. When he turned his head, his friend, who had clearly been by his side just before, had disappeared wordlessly. "Water Mountain?" the player called out. No reply came. There was no sign of his friend anywhere either. Just when he was about to pull up his friend's list and message him, he suddenly heard something rattling from behind him. He turned around to look and saw the willow tree next to him reaching out with its tentacle-like branches to catch him. At this moment, the player saw a silver badge hanging on one of the tree branches. It was his friend's equipment. The player instantly realized what had happened, but there was no time for him to scream. The willow branches climbed onto his shoulders and strangled him. His screen turned black. He couldn't see anything. Health. The only thing that this player could see was his health falling rapidly. This type of damage was enough to put this willow tree ghost at the level of a dungeon boss. Was this an opponent a player could solo? Dungeons were always played with a team. The player fell into despair. He was ready to meet up with his friend. Suddenly, he heard several snaps. He could suddenly see again. Countless sword light linked together, cutting the willow tree ghost's branches into bits and pieces. The player couldn't bother with thinking too much. He immediately struggled free and jumped back. Then, he saw that player also jump back. Those were clearly a Blade Master's slashes, but then a fireball suddenly shot out from his fingers. Fireball? The player stared foolishly. Even if this was a low-leveled elementalist skill, it shouldn't be coming out from a Blade Master's hands. However, in the next moment, when he saw that person's ID, he immediately understood. Lord Grimm. Lord Grimm. God Yi Shu's unspecialized, Lord Grimm. The player was stunned. This character hadn't been around for very long, but he had already turned into a legend in the game. The player had heard from his friends from the 10th server about how Lord Grimm had dyed the 10th server red with blood. When he arrived at the Heavenly Domain at level 55, he was chased by level 70 players, who were even top experts of the big guilds. Then, Lord Grimm's identity was revealed. Lord Grimm was God Yi Chu. And from this moment on, Lord Grimm's life became more difficult whenever anyone met him. Every famous character in the game had experienced this sort of vexation. Whenever famous characters logged on, the luckier ones would just be surrounded non-stop. The unluckier ones would be chased and killed. But for this type of large-scale event, these characters couldn't miss it because the drop rate of all sorts of items would increase in this event. And among these items, there was one kind that was bound to a character and couldn't be traded. Only the character who picked it up could use it, so no pro character would dare ignore it. Skill books. Even the most endgame content, wild bosses, very rarely dropped them. Finding a skill book from a random monster required heavenly luck. If not, these pro characters would have maxed out their stats even if they died. They wouldn't be missing 100, 200 skill points back when they were level 70. The skill book drop rate was greatly increased like everything else, so pro characters naturally hoped to seize this opportunity. As a result, whenever a large-scale event came out, it wasn't difficult to find pro characters. However, these pro characters wouldn't be wearing their silver equipment. If players killed them and their equipment dropped, it would be a gigantic headache. Pro characters would just pick some random purple or orange characters to wear. Lord Grimm could obviously switch equipment too. It was just that his equipment had always just been in-game level equipment. His Myriad Manifestations umbrella was a silver equipment though. However, this weapon couldn't be switched, so Lord Grimm would definitely be able to show his full strength. Fireballs shot out in rapid succession. The flames gradually spread until it covered the entire willow tree. The willow tree branches kept on twitching as if it were struggling. As the flames rose into the sky, it burned. Finally, it stopped moving. Lord Grimm went back, raised his arms, and his Myriad Manifestations umbrella transformed into a spear. With a circle swing, the willow tree was knocked into the air and then broke up into burnt chips. It had been thoroughly killed. How strange. That didn't count as a first kill? The players on the streets were still screaming because of the various objects that had turned into ghosts. On the other hand, the god was wondering why he hadn't gotten the first kill. This was the difference between them. Chapter 1097. Intense competition. The ghosts appeared so suddenly and unexpectedly, catching countless players off guard. As a result, Yishu killing a ghost so easily and calmly made him seem that much more imposing. It wasn't just the player that Yishu had saved. The entire street of players quickly realized that someone over there had successfully killed a ghost. It didn't seem like all that much. This scene made the confidence of the players skyrocket. Quite a few immediately took out their weapons and charged at these strange phantasms. Their spirited shouts quickly turned into cries of despair. Too many of them had only seen that a player had killed a ghost and hadn't paid attention to that player's ID. Lord Grimm, Yishu. He was a figure that stood at the top of glory. How could normal players hope to replicate his grandeur? Dungeon monsters weren't that easy to kill for normal players. The entire street transformed into a field of slaughter. The players hadn't been prepared for the difficulty of this time's ghost parade. Their confidence from seeing Lord Grimm successfully kill the willow tree instantly disappeared into nothingness. The players screamed and fled in fear. As for the imposing figure that had killed the only ghost over here, he became their savior. They couldn't help but gather towards this player. After getting closer, they saw his name and finally understood that they had made a misunderstanding. God, save us, several players begged. Lowering themselves in front of God Yishu was nothing shameful. Everyone, calm down, Yishu called out, these ghosts aren't difficult to deal with. Pay attention to their weaknesses and then choose a target that you can easily restrain to fight. If that's not enough, party up. Yes, if they couldn't solo an enemy, partying with others was the easiest solution. The players in the game should understand. It was just that for this event, would playing alone or partying with others give more rewards? The players needed to consider this question before deciding, so no one had immediately formed a party. However, after realizing that these ghosts weren't so easy to kill along with Yishu's advice, the players started calling over their friends or searching for a party to join. Yishu received countless party invites. As for the ghosts' weaknesses. What type of weaknesses do they have, God? Someone asked. I'm studying them too, Yishu replied. It was his first time seeing these types of monsters. Wood is afraid of fire. Fire is afraid of water. Basic logic shouldn't be wrong. Yishu had tested this theory before. For example, against that willow tree, he had only thrown out a few low-leveled fireballs, instantly burning that willow tree to ashes. It was far more efficient than hacking at the tree. The players seemed to somewhat understand. At this moment, all sorts of ghosts were starting to attack them. Look for weaknesses. The players started racking their brains. The very first ghost that had charged over at them made them want to cry. Wooden barrels. What was its weakness? Fire. These barrels were made of wood. Players with fire element attacks tried their hand, but it didn't seem too effective. What is it? The players pondered over this question but couldn't figure it out. Yishu was standing on the side and also sweating. When he said weaknesses, he had just been speculating. Who knew if all these ghosts had weaknesses? However, right now, the players were bitterly searching for one as if they were following an imperial decree. Yishu suddenly felt like there was a lot of pressure on him. Amidst the chaos, someone suddenly yelled in pleasant surprise, "Attack the bottom. Attack the bottom of these barrels. The lower you go, the lower their defense." Everyone was startled, but quickly responded. If a barrel didn't have a bottom, then it couldn't be used, so the bottom of the barrel was the weakness? It was quite logical, but anyone who thought of such an answer had to be a bit crazy. After finding this weakness, the players discovered that these buckets weren't that difficult. A bunch of wooden barrel bottoms were destroyed. These wooden barrels instantly lost their liveliness. They fell to the ground and rolled around powerlessly. Kill. Their morales had truly risen this time. After figuring out the trick, they suddenly became fearless. As for Yishu, his goals weren't so low. As he looked for monsters to kill, he checked the leaderboards. The leaderboards were dazzling to the eyes. The event had just begun, but the pro players were already displaying what true strength was. The first 10 and even as far as the first 20 places were occupied by pro players. Troubling Rain, Valkyria, Cloud Piercer, Dazzling 100 Blossoms, Desert Dust, Demon Subduer. The previous events also had leaderboards, but they weren't fully occupied by pro characters because if it wasn't an event taking place during a holiday, pro players wouldn't usually be the ones playing on these characters. It was usually someone from the guild department playing in their place. The staff members of the guild department could be considered elite experts in the game, but they were far from possessing the dominating skill of pro players. However, the Ghost Parade happened to take place during the summer. The pro players personally took up the task, resulting in them sweeping the leaderboards. Yi Shu looked at his ranking. He wasn't in the top 10, but he wasn't too far away either. He was currently ranked 16. Surrounding him were a bunch of pro characters. The points were constantly fluctuating. A few moments later, he dropped from 16 to 18, overtaken by Flying Sword and Blossoming Chaos. Everyone's working hard, Yi Shu mumbled. He couldn't relax either. The street that he was on had quite a few ghosts, but there were also quite a few players. Everyone was fighting over them. No matter how skilled he was, it was hard to avoid his efficiency dropping. A quiet and desolate place was ideal. Unfortunately, when Yi Shu logged on, he couldn't find any good places. He could only blame it on his bad luck. Yes, luck. In this type of event, technical skill and tactical skill were secondary. Luck was most important, especially for pro players who were all at the similar skill levels. Only normal players would flee in terror because of these ghosts. However, the normal players had started forming parties and helping one another as if it were a dungeon. Their combat power instantly shot up. The ghosts on this street were quickly cleared. Yi Shu found the time to check the leaderboards again and found that he had already dropped outside of the top 20. Only a fixed number of ghosts spawned every day all in one wave. As time went on, trying to catch up to those ahead required even greater luck. Today clearly wasn't Yi Shu's day. After that street was swept clean, he looked for another place to hunt, but his kills were intermittent. He continued to fall on the leaderboards, making Yi Shu feel even more helpless. After going around several blocks, Yi Shu realized with astonishment that there were a bunch of tails following behind his butt. Yes, not just one tail, but a bunch. Yi Shu's Lord Grimm stopped on a stone bridge in the city and turned around. He could already recognize some of their names. However, these guys were still pretending. Some of them were switching equipment. Some of them acted like they were chatting with each other. Some of them even pretended like they were just passing by, walking past Lord Grimm. "Which guild are you guys from?" Yi Shu asked. No one paid him any attention. They continued with their act. "Stop pretending. You, the one following me since that clock tower. You, the one from the river area 4. You were at that street in the very beginning." No, Yi Shu pointed at a few characters. They finally stopped pretending and started backing away cautiously. They were also sizing up the other players around them. "It looks like you're not all from the same guild." Yi Shu saw this scene and said. Still no one answered. Yi Shu didn't need them to answer. These guys obviously weren't here to admire him and ask for his signature. The big guilds had found his location and sent people here to mess things up for him. They couldn't stop him, but they could at least slow him down. How mean. Who sent these people to follow behind my butt? Those players weren't going to talk, so Yi Shu could only go to the pro player chat group and fiercely denounce the conduct of these guilds. No one paid him any mind. Everyone was playing the game, and the pro player chat group was unexpectedly dead. How long had it been in the pro scene since everyone had gone into the game? Yi Shu felt a bit dazed. "Wu Chen, have our guild members take note of where the other pro characters are located." Yi Shu returned to the game and messaged Wu Chen. His Lord Grimm was also in guild happy. Any orders that he gave in the guild would naturally be followed. However, their guild leader was still Wu Chen, and since this was a new guild, establishing a guild leader's authority was very important. Pro players abusing their statuses to do certain things in the guild was harmful to the guild's management. "Oh, okay," Wu Chen replied back and then announced it to the guild. Guild Happy had also reached max capacity. There were certainly spies from other guilds inside. 5 minutes hadn't even passed since Wu Chen's announcement and the pro player chat group started livening up again. "Revenge breeds revenge asterisk," Wang Jiaxi said. "There will never be an end to it," Huang Xiaoshan finished the saying, but a sentence was too short, so he added in his own personal opinion, "Old Yi, do you really need to do that? Insisting on going an eye for an eye is too unsightly." Exactly. Events like this don't come often. Let's all be friends. Samsara's Zhang Batao also spoke his opinion. Then why don't you guys tell your guilds to withdraw the people tailing me? Yi Shu said. Yes, the pro players expressed. Not long afterwards, the anonymous stalkers gradually dispersed. Okay, there's nothing wrong now, right? Let's all have a friendly competition. Old Yi, you've gotta work harder. When I check the leaderboards, I can't even see you, Huang Shaoshan said. His troubling reign was currently number 1 on the leaderboards. It was a rare chance for him to gloat. But in time it took for him to type out these few words, the leaderboard suddenly changed. Fuck, Huang Shaoshan roared in the chat group. Zhou Zekai's Cloudpiercer had jumped from 3rd to 1st, pushing troubling reign down to 2nd. Ha, Zhou Zekai rarely spoke in the chat group, and he only said one word. Chapter 1098. Seaweed Monster. Huang Shaoshan wouldn't be Huang Shaoshan if he didn't shoot back. However, Yi Shu wasn't in the mood to admire his trash talking. He might have gotten rid of his tails, but his placing on the rankings hadn't changed. 32. That was his current placing. The street he began on had helped him stay in the top 20, but after leaving the street, Yi Shu's luck wasn't very good. He didn't meet enough monsters to let him keep his position. His current 32nd place was temporary, and considering how peaceful the street that he was on was, his placing would probably fall even more when he reached the end of the road. No matter what, he couldn't just stay there and not move. The ghosts spawned at the same time. If they weren't there, they weren't there. It wasn't like you could wait at their respawn point for them to respawn. Yi Shu had Lord Grimm walk over the stone bridge and ended up at a crossroads with a left, middle, and right path. However, all 3 choices seemed equally peaceful. Yi Shu wanted to cry. Why was he so unfortunate today? Let's just keep walking, Yi Shu thought to himself as Lord Grimm stepped onto the bridge. He was about to continue walking when, suddenly, he realized that he couldn't step forward. Next, his character's view spun and Lord Grimm was thrown to the ground. Where did this attack come from? Yi Shu was stunned. The moment Lord Grimm was about to hit the ground, he hastily quick recovered, but it didn't work. The strike had been a grab, but it somehow managed to close in on Yi Shu without him noticing, striking a direct hit. It was only after his character had been pulled to the ground that Yi Shu saw what had hit him as he turned Lord Grimm's view. Something had tangled itself around Lord Grimm's ankle. What was it? Yi Shu didn't even have the time to look at it clearly when it suddenly yanked backwards. Yi Shu slashed at it as it moved and Lord Grimm's sword struck an accurate hit, but nothing happened. The thing shrank and then, with a flick, pulled Lord Grimm upwards into the air. With this, Yi Shu had a clear view. This weird thing that came out of nowhere had crept out of the lake under the stone bridge. Seaweed covered the lake surface, almost entirely, and it was impossible to see what was actually at the bottom of the lake. Lord Grimm switched the Myriad Manifestations umbrella to its gun form and sent a Gatling gun towards this unknown monster. Water splashed everywhere and seaweed flew into the air, but this thing was still unaffected just like when he slashed at it. Yi Shu still couldn't tell what was under the lake. Then, with a splash, Lord Grimm was pulled under the water. Where is it? As soon as he went under, Yi Shu looked around, but didn't find anything. The thing around Lord Grimm's ankle was still there. Yi Shu followed it upwards with his eyes and suddenly realized, how come it was coming from above the water now? What monster was this? Yi Shu could feel a headache coming on. If there was any difficulty in the ghost parade, then for Yi Shu, it would be what he was currently experiencing. The ghosts were all completely new NPCs. He had never previously encountered any of them in-game, so he didn't know any of their characteristics or skills. Even gods were newbies when up against these completely new monsters. And now, Yi Shu had encountered a very tricky one. Although he had confidence he could defeat his target, every minute spent on it was a minute lost. Just look, he had already fallen to 35 in this short span of time. Yi Shu was still in the claws of this monster, but he still had time to check the rankings, finding he had fallen by another 3 places already. In that instant, the monster finally launched another attack, and this time, Yi Shu finally figured out what it was. It was seaweed. The seaweed that covered the entire surface of the lake, green like something that had been vomited out, was the true form of this monster. No wonder it had seemed to come from under the water at first, but later seemed to come from above. This thing was on the water's surface. It had taken Yi Shu quite a while to figure out what he was fighting, and the seaweed monster had already begun to attack him by then. The seaweed that had been floating on the surface suddenly sunk in clusters, like will-o-wisps. Yi Shu didn't know what kind of attack this was, but he wouldn't let it hit him so easily. He hastily had Lord Grimm swim further down. However, something tightened around his foot. The seaweed was still tangled around Lord Grimm's ankle. What a long CC. Yi Shu was shocked. Even if it was an NPC, their skills still couldn't diverge from Glory's design. Offensive attacks dealt damage and crowd control effects lasted a duration of time. No matter if it was damage or duration, there had to be a limit. How long had this seaweed been restricting Lord Grimm's movement? How was it still doing this? How long did this ghost's skills last for? Yi Shu didn't have the energy to spare on complaining because the will-o-wisp seaweed that had sunk down had attacked. Their attack was very basic, just throwing themselves at Lord Grimm in an attempt to hit him. However, there were too many sunken clusters of seaweed to count. He could dodge one, but if they all began to attack together, then they'd form a net and then there wouldn't be any room to dodge. He had to dodge them preemptively. The seaweed was preventing him from going down, and upwards. Above him was the water surface which was covered in seaweed. Going upwards would be putting himself in the monster's embrace, an even worse choice. Hurry up and break. Yi Shu could only keep going down. Snapping the restraint around Lord Grimm's ankle became key. He slashed down again. The seaweed bent with the slash, but it refused to snap. It was clearly extremely flexible and durable. Yi Shu didn't have time to try out new methods and could only follow his current line of thought. The myriad manifestations umbrella switched to its gun form. With a bang, a bullet shot out. As the bullet left the chamber, the umbrella was transformed into a sword once more, striking down. The bullet hit the seaweed and the flash of the blade slashed down as well. This time, the seaweed was cut through completely. Yi Shu hastily had Lord Grimm dive as the clusters of seaweed swarmed forth, crashing together in a ball. That was close. It was rare for Yi Shu to ever experience such a heart-stopping moment in the online game. After noticing the flexibility of the seaweed, Yi Shu gave it a Spitfire stun bullet, and after causing it to tense, he was able to easily slash through it. Then his eyes landed on the cluster of seaweed behind him and had Lord Grimm throw a grenade over. It'd feel very good to blow it up. As expected, it felt delightful. The large cluster of seaweed was blown to pieces and several pieces hit Lord Grimm. His health immediately plummeted, falling directly to red blood. What the fuck? Yi Shu flailed in a panic. He immediately opened up the umbrella as a shield, while casting all his healing skills on himself and ingesting all the potions that would help him save his life. Only then was his health stabilized. What a powerful attack. Yi Shu was shocked. If just another 2 pieces had hit him, Lord Grimm would have been KO'd. This immense damage output was beyond anything Yi Shu knew of. Their combative power rivaled that of dungeon monsters, but this sort of attack power was far beyond normal dungeon monsters. It was boss level, wild boss level even. Yi Shu didn't dare underestimate this monster. The seaweed that had been blown apart by the grenade hadn't died, floating in the water and preparing a new round of attacks. How would he kill this seaweed? Would a stun bullet work against them? Yi Shu had little to go on, but knew he had to try. He shot a small cluster of seaweed and struck down with his sword right after. The small cluster immediately broke apart, dispersing in the water as if it had dissolved. It worked. Yi Shu was certain now, but he wasn't happy. With the seaweed covering the entire surface of the lake, how many attacks would he have to make to kill it completely? As for how the seaweed got so strong, Yi Shu immediately got the gist. This seaweed floated ever so peacefully on the water's surface like that, a very cunning disguise. Then, it would ambush passing players. Even Yi Shu didn't realize what was happening after being caught, so there was little need to explain how much worse it would be for normal players. Continuously managing to kill players this way, the seaweed monster had grown this strong. Should he count himself lucky or unlucky? Yi Shu didn't know. Such a large monster would definitely provide many points, so he should be happy about finding it. The problem was, this monster wasn't just big, but powerful. Could he beat it? This thing's attack power rivaled a wild boss. If its health was also that shocking, then Yi Shu would just give up on it entirely. But for now, he decided to take a shot. The small clusters of seaweed were just a method of attack for the seaweed monster. Destroying them was just defending himself. If he wanted to kill this monster, he had to attack its main body, the seaweed that was floating on the water's surface. However, he had to deal with these small clusters first. Not long later, Yi Shu baited the small clusters of seaweed into trying to catch him again like before. Then, at the last minute, he dodged. The small clusters of seaweed once again clustered up into a larger group. Lord Grimm turned and delivered a stun bullet before his myriad manifestations umbrella swung up as a spear, dragon tooth stabbing up before a double stab followed. As for skills like falling flower palm that required him to get even closer, Yi Shu didn't dare use them before he tested them out. After the double stab, he finished it off with a sword draw. The 3 skills were completed in an instant, and with the whooshing sound of flowing water, the scattered seaweed vanished. It worked. With this experiment a success, Yi Shu's spirits lifted. The seaweed monster was above him. After this experiment, Yi Shu had a good idea of how to deal with it. Now he had to see if he could destroy the main body of the seaweed monster with the same method. If it had the durability of a wild boss, then he'd leave immediately. In the next moment, Lord Grimm entered attack range of the water's surface, flicking his sleeves and gathering a chunk of the seaweed on the water's surface into a ball with a shadow cloak. Then, a stun bullet and an attack. Chapter 1099. Jumping to number 1. Dragon Tooth, double stab, sword draw. Yi Shu chose to continue use what had worked before, except that after 3 skills, the cluster of seaweed was still good and well. The durability of the main body was, as expected, slightly better. However, it was only slightly. Yi Shu quickly followed up with a 4th skill and, at last, the seaweed he had gathered with Shadow Cloak dispersed into nothingness. Yi Shu gave a long sigh of relief. In that moment, he had been rather nervous, because the effects of stun bullet had a limit to its duration. When he had delivered the first strike, he knew that the problem wouldn't lie in if he could deal enough damage to destroy the main body or not, but time. Could he deal enough damage in the time given by the stun bullet? In the end, he succeeded. This made Yi Shu feel much more secure. Lord Grimm jumped out of the water, right through the destroyed cluster of seaweed. The myriad manifestations umbrella opened into a rotor wings and he immediately left the water behind him. The seaweed monster wasn't willing to let go of its target so easily, hurriedly sending out a tentacle to catch him. Yi Shu had been expecting that and had Lord Grimm rise up at full speed. The seaweed wasn't slow either, but characters could move around in the air with rotor wings, so Yi Shu would naturally use this to dodge. Yi Shu wasn't planning to leave. Leaving the lake surface was just to wait for his skill cooldown. Low-leveled skills always had short cooldowns, but those that had a bonus effect like stun bullet would have a longer cooldown. Otherwise, if someone could endlessly keep their opponents CCED, and one like stun, too, there'd be no need to fight. Stun bullet's cooldown was a full 10 seconds and Yi Shu was currently trying to last through these 10 seconds. However, he wouldn't just keep dodging. As he dodged, Lord Grimm threw a grenade down. The surface of the lake exploded. Though this didn't really do any damage to the seaweed, since it had come out of the water, the seaweed had all been squeezed into a cluster. It worked. Yi Shu was relieved. If he could gather the seaweed like this, then killing the seaweed monster would become much faster. Soon enough, the cooldown for stun bullet was over and Lord Grimm landed as rotor wings ended, striking his sword at the water's surface and sending out an earthquake sword to sweep the seaweed together. Then, he added a shadow cloak. This time, he had gathered even more seaweed, but when Lord Grimm began to attack, Yi Shu knew that this wasn't good. The more he gathered, the more health the seaweed had. This was a very logical design. Yi Shu hadn't neglected that, of course. He had gathered the seaweed this time with the intention of trying things out. After making so many attempts, he was now certain he'd be unable to destroy the seaweed in the time the stun bullet gave him. Stun bullet's stun effect lasted for 2 seconds and this duration wouldn't see much increase as the skills rank was raised. After all, the control effect of a stun was very powerful. An 8 or 10 second stun would be beyond broken. When stun bullet was maxed out, the stun effect would only be increased to 3. 5 seconds, so it was up to the player to decide how many ranks to raise it in accordance to their reliance and usage of stun bullet. Lord Grimm's stun bullet was only rank 1 with the basic 2-second stun. Using 4 skills in 2 seconds was already his limit and Yi Shu had to make sure he didn't slip up at all. Now, the seaweed had even more health, so Lord Grimm, with his abysmal damage output, wouldn't be able to destroy such a large cluster no matter what. This result was greatly disappointing for Yi Shu. However, with 2 rounds of gathering to go on, he now knew very clearly on how much to gather at one time. Then, all he had to do was repeat. The seaweed was cleared up bit by Yishu and the lake soon returned to its original clean state. He was nearly done. Seeing the 2 clusters of seaweed over there, Lord Grimm swam over and then Yishu heard voices coming from the bank. It's right over here. We don't know how many players it's killed already. This seaweed monster is extremely powerful, so keep your guards up. However, we've already found a way to defeat it. Witches and Spitfires, make sure to cooperate. You're the key. A large group of people had gathered at the lakeside. Normal players weren't idiots either, having also found a way to deal with the seaweed monster. It was just that they had no way of completing all the steps on their own, so they could only get helpers to cooperate with them. The group of people had excitedly rushed over to kill this massive monster, but what they were met with was a clear lake. Where did the seaweed that was said to be taking over the lake? Shit, no way. Some observant players quickly noticed Lord Grimm's existence, swimming to a cluster of seaweed, shadow cloak, stun bullet, then a rapid stream of combos. Wasn't this the strategy their team leader had been emphasizing the whole way here? Are you goddamn kidding me? The one who had gathered all these people here was a Spitfire player. The first time he had been ambushed by the seaweed monster and killed. Then, running over to get his revenge, he had been killed again. He couldn't accept it and came again. By then, the seaweed monster had grown quite a bit and he was even less of a match, but this time he had discovered a way to kill the seaweed monster. The 4th time, he had charged over, thinking that knowing the method to killing the monster would assure his victory, but he had underestimated the strength of the seaweed monster. After dying 4 times in a row, he finally relented and went and gathered a team, also figuring out a good way to gather the monster. However, by the time he returned, he found most of the seaweed gone and the one who did it had done so with the method he had gained through 4 sacrifices. Who dares? The leader was enraged. He thought that this person had been watching him and stole his method. He was a dirty thief. Chasing after the figure along the bank, the team leader held up his gun to shoot, but was suddenly knocked into by one of his companions. With a stumble, his shot missed. What? The team leader was furious. Are you stupid? Shadow cloak, then stun bullet afterwards, then followed up with a combo including sword draw. Can't you tell who this is through those variety of skills? The one who had knocked into the team leader said. The team leader paused. In the past, if anyone saw a character using skills across different class types, they'd think it was an NPC, but now, all the players knew that there was such an existence, God Yishu and his unspecialized, Lord Grimm. The team leader trembled as he walked along the bank a little further, and by then, Lord Grimm was also swimming towards the last cluster of seaweed. The name above his head was finally visible to the team leader. Lord Grimm. Sure enough, it was Lord Grimm. Immediately, the misunderstanding of stealing his method was dismissed. If he couldn't even figure out this method on his own, then would he still be God Yishu? It was just that the team leader had been bustling around, sacrificing himself and gathering helpers, confidently returning to reap his profits, but in the end he didn't even manage to get the scraps. That was too depressing. There's another cluster. The team leader couldn't accept this. Witches, go, shadow cloak. The witch didn't move. Why aren't you guys doing anything? Did you disconnect? You there? The leader yelled. And try to steal God Yishu's kill. Are you crazy? The witch asked in shock. But I found it first. The team leader wailed. Found it first, the entire team was speechless. Though they understood this guy's feelings, you might have found it first, but if you found it first, yet didn't kill it first, then it wasn't yours. This was common sense. Go on, hurry up and go. The team leader went to yell at another witch, seeing that the first one refused to move. This one seemed to be close with the team leader and didn't have the heart to reject the other. However, he went up slowly, raising his broom into the air for several seconds without doing anything. By the time he was done posing, Lord Grimm had ended the battle. The one who had been about to attack turned back around in relief. Oops, it's too late now. The team leader cried. However, he neither had the skill or a good reason to bother Yishu about this. What made him even more jealous was that after the seaweed monster was killed, Lord Grimm's position on the rankings had managed to instantly jump to first. The team leader hadn't noticed at first. What brought it to their attention was someone suddenly yelling about it in the global chat. Fuck fuck fuck. What cheat did you use, Yishu? How did you suddenly get to first? Did you kill the GM? You cheat, I'm reporting you. Isn't there a GM here to make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen? The cathartic speech came from Huang Shaoshan's troubling reign. The entirety of Glory was silent. No one had thought they would get the chance to admire Huang Shaoshan's trash talk in the game's global chat. Huang Shaoshan had been overtaken by Zhou Zikai, but then his luck had been pretty good and rapidly took his place back. As for Yishu's Lord Grimm, he was 30-something already, so Huang Shaoshan had disregarded him as a competitor. But that was when he killed a monster and wanted to check his score, only to be met with Lord Grimm's name above his troubling reigns. Am I seeing this correctly? Huang Shaoshan rubbed his eyes and after confirming what he had seen, immediately exploded in rage in the global chat. Yishu himself had noticed before him. This seaweed monster had managed to raise his points all the way to first place. He was also very surprised at that. Immediately, he thought of an idea of getting a bunch of Smurfs to feed up a monster and then killing it with his main account, then noticed Huang Shaoshan's yelling in the global chat. Ha, Yishu replied. None of the players found anything out of the ordinary about this, but the pro players were all laughing their heads off by then. Just now, in the pro player chat, didn't Zhou Zikai give the same response when Huang Shaoshan had been trash-talking after being overtaken by Zhou Zikai? Now Yishu was copying Zhou Zikai. Huang Shaoshan was probably choking on his anger by now. The global chat in the game had a message cooldown, so he couldn't spam. Instead, the pro player chat was flooded by him. Seeing the number of new messages jumping rapidly, Yishu knew that it had to be Huang Shaoshan erupting again, as well as those who were greeting him despite knowing that he was just trash-talking. Yishu was thinking about the possibility of raising a monster. The only thing he wasn't sure about was how many characters he'd have to feed to a monster to get it to grow to this level. Was an experiment necessary? Yishu thought about this as he had Lord Grimm climb back onto the bank. On the bank, the team of players stood there, stunned. After the trash talk in the global chat, they also realized that Lord Grimm had managed to jump to first place. The sheer number of points the seaweed monster was worth was clear for all to see. Even though they wouldn't have as many gains after the points were distributed amongst them, it would still be quite heft. But now, it was all for nothing. Everyone was disappointed, but what could they say when faced with God Yishu? So amazing, God. God, are you leaving? Don't rush off, God. The players fawned over Lord Grimm like a paparazzi. Chapter 1100. Raised Monsters. Raise them. Yishu couldn't do his monster raising plan alone. He needed to coordinate with his guild for this to work. Directly asking guild members to sacrifice themselves was somewhat inhumane, so he would need to rely on his alternate accounts to complete the task. Yishu was just about to discuss with Wu Chen how exactly they should carry this out, but Wu Chen already replied back, "This isn't going to be easy." Why? Yishu asked. I've already tried it. The base value of a ghost is 100 points. If the ghost kills a player, its value will increase by 1. Let's put aside issues like manpower and account cards on hand. Let's just look at the problem with the ghost killing players. If a player doesn't wear any armor and doesn't defend, a ghost will need 10 or 20 seconds to kill the player. Killing 100 players is equal to 100 more points. If we average it out and say 15 seconds per person, 100 players would need 25 minutes. Of course, the ghost having the ability to attack en masse and killing faster the stronger it grows are factors, but if you consider the issue of the possible risks involved and our current manpower, raising a monster won't be an easy task. Wu Chen explained. Oh, understood. Yishu replied. As soon as he heard that a single player killed was only worth 1 more point, he knew that it wouldn't be easy to make this work for the current happy. Putting aside the calculations that Wu Chen made, finding enough manpower would require a lot of effort. He didn't have enough on hand. The internet cafe customers had account cards, but who was going to help him for no reason? Especially since all of the Glory players were all busy with this event too. As a result, his only option would be to hire people. With Happy's current resources, he could afford it, but was that worth it just for this event? Yishu calculated, but then he felt that something wasn't right. When he had killed that seaweed monster, Lord Grimm had obtained 625 points. It had already killed 525 players? It had only been an hour since the event had started. It didn't conform with Wu Chen's calculations. How did this seaweed monster do it? Could it be that its original value was high? It had started out as a mini-boss level ghost? The event never said anything about that though. Yi Shu was pondering over this mystery, when he saw a team of players from the far end of the street charging over. He recognized the person in front, Samsara's guild leader, 3 Realms 6 Paths. When this team reached the bridge, they hastily looked towards the water beneath the bridge. In that instant, Yi Shu realized something. As for 3 Realms 6 Paths, the instant he saw Lord Grimm, he stopped looking under the bridge and shouted, "Fuck you." You guys raised it," Yi Shu said. He figured it out. This monster that had eaten 525 players hadn't grown naturally. It had been intentionally raised by people. Yi Shu hadn't been the only one to think of raising a monster. Just look at Wu Chen. Wu Chen had already tested it before Yi Shu had even asked. He had clearly noticed that there was a potential exploit. As for the other guilds, their in-game experience was far richer than pro players, so they had noticed it too. Those guilds had the manpower and the accounts to carry out something Happy couldn't. As a result, raising a monster seemed to be an obvious course of action. Samsara had tried, and the ghost that they found was quite a good one. This seaweed monster had weak defense and low health. It seemed to be a feature that all ghosts in the Ghost Parade had in common. But apart from that, it had powerful attacks and the scattered seaweed clumps could attack many players at once, making it a ghost perfect for growing quickly. Even though it had been raised. Why didn't you have anyone guard it? Yi Shu raised an honest question. What had just happened was one of the potential risks that Wu Chen had mentioned. Yi Shu had just taken away all of the effort that Samsara had put into the ghost, yet now he was giving them a suggestion. 3 Realms 6 Paths wanted to cry. Why wasn't anyone guarding it? They obviously had people in the beginning, but as the seaweed monster became stronger, players started coming over and becoming its food. That was a cherry on top for Samsara, so not only did they not stop them, they welcomed them. As a result, the guards felt like there was no need to watch over it. They might as well just become its food and make it grow faster. Lord Grimm just happened to pass by and get caught by the seaweed monster. He just happened to be an unspecialized too, allowing him to kill the seaweed monster alone because of his multi-class skill set. After Samsara saw Troubling Rain cursing in the global chat, they realized something wasn't right. They didn't know if other guilds were raising monsters, but they were doing it. 3 Realms 6 Paths immediately asked the players stationed there whether the seaweed monster was safe and sound, but the team guarding the seaweed monster had sacrificed themselves and were on their way back, so when 3 Realms 6 Paths asked, they kept stalling. 3 Realms 6 Paths suddenly had a bad feeling and personally went over. The others were still checking under the bridge, but 3 Realms 6 Paths immediately noticed that Lord Grimm was on the bridge. Lord Grimm had suddenly gained 600 points in one go and jumped to first place. The seaweed monster that we had painstakingly raised had been snatched away by this fucker? 3 Realms 6 Paths felt bitter. But after cursing, "Fuck you," he couldn't say anything more. How could he blame Yi Shu? He couldn't because Yi Shu had already started scolding him justly and forcefully. You have to watch over it. You guys raised such a terrifying monster. Who knows how many innocent players were harmed. I almost died too. You've got to be more careful next time. Next time? This bastard was thinking of a next time? If this were someone else, 3 Realms 6 Paths would have had called everyone over to blast this guy to smithereens. But it had to be Yi Shu. It wasn't like he revered Yi Shu. It was a question of whether they could actually beat him. He didn't have that many people on his side, and all of them had been food. They had lost a lot of experience and had no equipment on them. If they actually tried to fight him, they would probably be the ones getting eaten, no? 3 Realms 6 Paths grit his teeth, but he could only swallow his anger. They could only blame themselves for being too greedy, wanting to use other passers-by as fodder. If they had made their guards stay to watch over it, their guards could have warned other people not to come over. They could have at least warned a dangerous fellow like Yi Shu. Fuck, would he have left just because they warned him? In reality, 3 Realms 6 Paths didn't think so. The purpose of a guard wasn't to warn people. Was a warning going to stop other people? When was the heavenly domain ever so peaceful? Especially between the club guilds. There were no grounds to argue with him. What's more, he didn't even know. Have him pay? Three Realms Six Paths wasn't naive enough to say that. This time, he could only take the blow and watch as Lord Grimm marched out magnanimously. As for the food, they were standing on the bridge, staring blankly at the clean river water. He obviously needed to tell the pro team what had happened because Three Realms Six Paths had already told them that they were raising a big monster for the pros to come get the points. But now, there was nothing. He had to at least tell them. Samsara wasn't the only one raising monsters. Clubs had their own dedicated in-game divisions. How could they not do any research towards this event? After looking at the rules, the club guilds had already been planning on doing this way before the event even started. It was just that they didn't know the specifics yet. When the even started and they tested it, they found out that one death was only 1 point. Such minuscule gains only allowed these guilds to gather enough manpower to raise a single big monster. Yishu's Lord Grimm suddenly jumping to first wasn't anything too surprising. Even though Huang Shaoshan had been cursing in the global chat, he also understood. However, why did Happy kill it so early? Why did Happy kill their raised monster so fast? The rather innocent people thought in this way. However, some people thought of the storm that Yishu always brought up wherever he went and guessed something very close to the truth. He hadn't stolen someone else's monster, did he? As a result, in that instant, it wasn't just Three Realms Six Paths checking on the situation. The various guild leaders were all asking about their raised monsters. Unfortunately, it was only Samsara with the grievous news. The other guilds heard that their raised monsters were safe and sound. They instantly felt their hearts relax. However, in the end, they were also curious about whether a guild had gotten unlucky or not. It wasn't hard to find out. They didn't even need to put their spies to use. Someone directly asked about in the guild leader chat group. I say, did Lord Grimm steal someone's monster? The first to speak was Tyrannical Ambitions Zhang Yu. As Excellent Era's old rival in the past, Tyranny always analyzed Yishu from the worst way possible. When Zhang Yu asked, the other curious guild leaders didn't need to ask. They simply replied with a, not ours. In the end, Three Realms Six Paths typed out a sad face. Everyone saw it and immediately understood. They rejoiced in their hearts, but they put on a fake smile and consoled him. Oh no, how could you be so careless? How could Three Realms Six Paths not know how happy these guild leaders were, but he really needed to speak his mind right now. These competitors of his were quite good listeners too. After hearing Three Realms Six Paths' tragic story, everyone naturally consoled him. Even though hadn't done it intentionally, with their impression of Yishu, they weren't going to defend him. They could only look at him through an evil lens. That guy definitely knew. Yeah, it was so obvious. How could he have not? What a terrible person. The scum among gods. Everyone's got to be more careful. As they chatted, the guild leaders ordered their monster-raising team, be on high alert, especially against Lord Grimm and anyone from Happy. Samsara too. Don't look at how everyone seemed to sympathizing with Three Realms Six Paths. In reality, they treated him the same as Yishu. They looked at him in the worst way possible too. Samsara's raised monster was gone. Would they try to steal someone else's? Everyone had thought of this issue. And at the same time, this exchange had let everyone realize that raising monsters wasn't something that they alone were doing. All of the guilds were doing the same. Then, where were they? If they could be stolen, they had to try. As a result, in an instant, the spies and open accounts of the various guilds started moving.